got different kinds of wealth. Creating wealth, and we have the creators that just do it based on a level of service, or they solve a particular problem. But what we know about that is creating wealth and maintaining wealth are very, very different. They're different skill sets. So we actually transition our hat from the creator to the maintainer. And there's been a lot of people. I've been teaching this class for 20 years. Had people come through for 20 years. So I've seen a lot of train wrecks, and so we've identified what those things are and why they happen. But sudden wealth, which comes upon you, whether you're an athlete, an entertainer, celebrity, tech executive, you inherited a bunch of money, you lack kind of the discipline to get there because you just got a big check. And so what happens? It's what we call fast money. And so people a lot of times are very ill-equipped. So our program, it was really designed for that individual that all of a sudden their economic scenario changed. When we look at slow money, like the Millionaire Next Door, or even the way John Saforic, the author of The Wealthy Gardener, he accumulated it slow over time. But what's interesting, and what John and I have talked a lot about, is the attributes and the qualities that you need to build slow wealth are really the same attributes that you're going to need to deal with sudden money. So we really looked at it as a crossover, and John's mission is to give the skills and the realization that every walk of life, whether you're a janitor or a Starbucks or mid-level manager, has the financial dream within his view, provided he adheres to various principles that John has identified in his book. I like to take his principles and then apply them into the sudden money spectrum, therefore equipping those individuals with the necessary tools to keep their wealth. But they have that common goal. So where do you get educated? From this guy, and this is the guy that's selling you product, or going to earn a fee from the very advice that he gives. And then where do you get answers? And a lot of times, you don't even know the question to ask in terms of when you enter into this field. You're ill-equipped. And what questions do you ask, and what are they? So that's where you ponder. Do you look on the internet? Really, where do you go? And so we're trying to provide that framework and really try to identify those blind spots, because blind spots are the things that really have that ability to really hurt you. And I'll get into my story in a little bit and talk about my blind spot. And I stepped right in it. And so this gal thinks everything's great, but she's about ready to die. So typically, where do you get answers from? So you got these questions. Obviously you go to the financial professionals. But what we know about that is, do you go to this guy? Okay, and do you trust him? Do you have confidence? And again, he's compensated from the advice that they give. Everybody's got this guy, right? The uneducated friend that no matter what is going on, he's got the answer for you. And so because you don't know, a lot of times you reach out to a friend because you trust him, and you're like, hey, what do you think about this? But you got to remember, would you go to the car mechanic and ask him about your hip or your heart or whatever? But you always have to get context for really where you're at. So the question that everybody has is, I got money, now what? And in the COVID scenario, this is magnified. So many people are in survival around what's occurring, where their businesses are. And I see a real difference here with how people are reacting to the crisis. And some people are just shutting their doors. Others are making it really, really hard to do business, and others are being incredibly entrepreneurial. One example is I love the Henry. And when the Henry was taken away, my morning coffee with my fiance Tiffany couldn't do that anymore. And yet they began to assemble picnics. They cut their prices 35%. They had drive-up service. I mean, it's just incredible just on a moment's notice, they went from kind of dine in to dine out. Other places just were not easy to do business with. Melanie talks about I'm a big biker. Some bike shops literally closed. And the ones that stayed open, it was very difficult to do business with them. They weren't closed inside. And then others kind of embraced the opportunity and said, we're going to take preventative measures inside and be clean, but we're going to stay open for business because people need us more than ever. They need to be able to go outside. They need to be able to really refresh themselves. So then we ask, okay, we got this money, now what? We go searching for answers. There's really two things that people ask themselves when they come into a lot of money. Two questions. One is how much my money can buy, and then what my money can support. So if you're at all wondering, so if you have $10 million, let's say, let's just use that as a round number, $10 million. $10 million can buy a lot of things. Don't do it. Don't be tempted. People will all of a sudden get this windfall and they go shopping. There's new watches, there's new clothes. There's also, I don't have this in the slide, but there's a different class of friends. If there's anybody that's been on this call, you'll notice when people's economic scenarios change, their friends change. I don't know what it is. And I know a lot of people of wealth and great wealth that are anonymous. They don't flaunt their wealth. They don't talk about what they do, but they're just somehow they got a beacon on their head and people find them. So the second question is what money can support. So it's just different. And so here it is. It's 4%. That's a number that is pretty well proven in the financial worlds that 4% distributions out of a portfolio is a sustainable amount that you can distribute and then adjust for inflation, and the principal balance of that 10 million can continue to grow. And that 4% is $400,000 a year. Then you pay tax. That's probably $250, $260, $270 after tax, is a very different spending level than 10 million. 10 million can buy cars and Ferraris and stuff, but it's not sustainable. So people that get into trouble really make two very significant mistakes. It's in spending and it's in leverage. And so we have this yacht that we show you and say, well, that's flashy. Is it right? Should you do that? Is it flamboyant? I have the money. Is it? Well, I interviewed a guy from my upcoming book. It should be out in a couple of weeks. Everybody that's in the program is going to get it. But there's a chapter in there called The Silent Billionaire. He's remained anonymous because he's incredibly low key. He's the wealthiest guy that you've never heard of. And he built a $125 million yacht. And I asked him about that. I said, why? What do you need a $125 million yacht for? He says, I am obsessed with my work. I am so passionate about what I do, and I sometimes do it at the detriment of my family and others. And so this boat, this yacht, is a vehicle for me to completely get away. When I'm on it, I don't think about anything. So I schedule time. So that's completely appropriate given the wealth level of this individual versus, what he's doing with his money versus somebody that does a yacht like this and finances it and has a massive payment, and the day of reckoning will come at some point in time. We look at cars and Ferraris and so how do you survive a crisis? And so there's a simple equation around just income and expenses. And so relative to the COVID, this crisis versus the 08 and 09, I'll tell you, the 08 and 09 crisis for me were very different. I was highly levered. I was making a lot of money, but when the crisis hit, I was ill prepared. So the thing that you really got to analyze and where you're at relative to survival is where are you with your income, your expenses, your liquidity, and your assets relative to be able to not only weather the storm, but to take advantage of it and to embrace it and say, okay, where's the opportunity? Where's the tide shifting? I don't know that I would be online here in Patrick's studio. This was an absolute force. I did not want to do that. This was one of those things that I was saying that I was going to do next year. I want to put my class online next year. I would teach at UCLA or I would teach at another university and somebody'd say, hey, we'd love to have your class online. And I'd say, I'm going to do that next year. This has been very uncomfortable for me. 2 weeks ago, I woke up one morning and I was like, I'm not doing it. I'm going to cancel. I panicked, yelled at everybody, and then just went on my bike and did a little ride, came back, it felt better, and I realized, no, I got to do this. You got to set things in motion. A lot of times things happen to us because God, the universe, is shifting us into another direction. There's something here for us to learn. And so, I show you this little guy because if your debt's really high and you got a little bit of income, you're in what I call forced reduction. So we don't want you to panic. We know that toilet paper is a hot commodity, and now I think it's readily available. It's crazy how toilet paper went off the charts. I don't know if anybody was standing in line at Target, but again, so question is, how much do I spend? 4% or less. 4% or less. It's free cash flow. We talk about it over and over and over. Free cash flow is the measurement of financial health for a company or for an individual. And so you always need to understand this statistic. You always need to understand kind of where you're at. So when you look at this guy and say, okay, is he spending too much money? I don't know. I don't know. If he's 4% or less, then he can run around on a private jet. But if he's spending more than 4%, really what he's doing is he's depleting his capital base. And people don't go broke overnight. They go broke slowly. And so am I doing the right thing relative to my assets versus my spending? There's a relationship there. And you spend too much, and as this erodes, then you're killing the golden goose. And one day there's just no more. There's no more eggs. And so will my money last? So we're not talking about the next year. We're talking about the next decade, the next multi-decade. Indians have something called the 7-generation fund, and it's the perpetuation of money and wealth. And so that's really what we want to communicate to our family, to our kids, is how long will it last? And I can't tell you how many people. I started my career in 95. I met this individual in 98. It was one of my first clients, super wealthy guy, broke today, broke. Not somebody that wasn't smart. Super, super smart business guy. He is broke. And I look back in that and I'll talk about the different landmines that he as an individual has stepped in. But this equation, which is up on the board now, is just simple. It's just income less costs equals profit. Like how much you putting away. In my book, I have a chapter to the athlete. And, what I say is if you want your income to perpetuate, you need to put away, so if you have a 3-year contract, you got to put away 70% of what you earn. So the income that you're living off is sustainable for the rest of your life. If you don't get the second contract. Do you follow me? If you get the second contract, then you can have an earnings bonus, an earnings increase. Athletes don't want to do that. They're like, wait a minute, I just signed a $5 million contract. I'm going to spend some money. And so when you really do the math and you look at, okay, how much can you spend? How much do you need to put away? So you do that calculation. We all need to do that. If you're putting away 2 to 3%, it's going to take you a long time to get there. You put away 5, 10, 15, 20%, and the time to financial freedom is a lot less. So in this equation here, people really operate in 2 levels, accumulation and distribution. And where the line goes down in distribution phase, it doesn't need to do that. It can actually increase because you're building wealth for future generations. So 2 different mindsets when you're in accumulation for distribution. So we'll talk about both, but when you're in distribution, there's various things that you got to be super aware of. You look at Michael Jackson. What happened? Guy was making a ton of money. He spent a lot of money. And so what happens is there's a sense of, I'm making all this money, I got all these assets. There's a false sense of security because they're not paying attention to what's going out versus what's coming in. They're not looking at the erosion of the capital base and how that can get you in trouble. So then the question is, am I doing the right thing with my wealth? And we have Bitcoin, just lots of opportunity. Who do I trust? How much should I pay the advisor? That's really an amazing question. One of the things that I do in my business is I know how much you should pay. And it's interesting, like let's look at a $10 million family and a $100 million family. Let's just be logical about it for a second. Advisors will charge anywhere from 0.5 point to 0.9. And I'll talk about that a little bit later on about how I feel about that. But a lot of times the fee won't go down incrementally based on 10 times the wealth. So does the investment advisor and firm do 10 times the amount of work? And the answer is no. And so a lot of times people just don't know because they don't know the right questions to ask. So we go back to the slides and we just look at the money and we just want to provide you with the rules. Imagine this. You walk into the car repair shop and you've got a really expensive car that's got a lot of really expensive stuff on it. And with you is an expert mechanic in that vehicle. And he's going to guide you through that process. How would you feel? You're going to have a very different outcome versus if you don't have him and you walk in and Sal comes out to you and says, hey, you need this and this and this. How are you going to know? So we try to provide that tools and that infrastructure about that. What questions should I be asking? We give you that. How do I properly deal with my heirs? The financial transition, just because people have money doesn't mean they're healthy. We see a lot of dysfunctions inside families that have a lot of money. The kids start to squabble. Wait a minute, he bought me a house. I gave more to Janet. He paid for college. He didn't pay for us. And so that's why so much of this is grounded in family health and how we deal with that. So we look at, the estate planning documents and who you listen to. And, there's just a lot of information overload. You got the insurance guy, you got the estate planning guy, you got your CPA, you got your tax attorney. You're getting it from a lot of different sources. So we're just going to try to be that voice in the calm. You got the financial professional, and depending upon, who they are, it's just, kind of times you try to feel that each one of them has their own kind of angle. And it's not that I'm saying they're good or bad. They just have their lens that they're looking through that oftentimes doesn't give you that proper picture. I don't know that the parable of the six blind wise men that were super wise because they were blind. And so all of their senses were heightened and they discovered a new animal and they said, go out and tell us what it is. And they all came back with different perspective. One said it was a fan, one said it was a rope, one said it was a spear. Other guy said, no, it's a tree, and no, it's a wall. And it was an elephant. But they were all looking at different pieces of the element. So you get that with different people that have very unique skills in different area. And then how about you? I see this a lot, wealthy people and people that come into money and are super successful and you've committed to being on this. But it's going to be hard. I mean, it's going to be really hard. 3 hours in your home looking at the computer is not easy. And what happens for people is you get distracted. I'm bored. I'm ready, and then you get this part of the super focus, and then, oh my God, there's a squirrel. What about over there? What happened? And then, like, all of a sudden you're to the races. So what I'm really wanting you to do is just kind of lock yourself down and just kind of get through this. And, at the end, you're going to be very satisfied that you took the time. That's an investment not only in your financial future, but your kids' financial future, because as part of this, you're going to want to start having the conversations with them, you know, in and around the family and the connection and the kitchen table and the, you know, what's going on in the world and where are we with money. And then we ask this question, you know, what's more important, finding an opportunity or avoiding mistakes? Do we have a poll here, Tiffany, or we don't? Okay. So, no, that's okay. I want to make sure that we get into it. But for most people, the goal is financial longevity. And so the question is, how do you get there? How do you get into financial longevity? How do you get to a point where you're just comfortable that no matter what happens to you, no matter what economic environment happens to you, you've got comfort in and around what you're doing. You have choices. And so that's really the goal of a program like this. And so what's most important? What's the order of how you're going to make decisions? Should we look for outperforming the market? You know, holy cow, look at where we were a month ago. You know, people were running for cover. The world was coming to an end, and all of a sudden we get a big stimulus. You know, we may have a vaccine, and you know, markets have done incredibly well. And so, or do we just look for the perfect investment? Do we go out and let's just buy Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Facebook, the FANG stocks? Or do we just look at consistent returns? You know, the reality of it is that when you are looking for financial longevity, you got to have consistency in your experience. It's way more important than the hot thing, the great stock. I can't tell you how many people are just like, I'm just going to own those 5 stocks and just sort of be done with that. And you got to be super careful because that's actually happened before. In the 70s, we had this group of stock called the Nifty 50, and people just super focused on just those, and then the next period of time was not very favorable to them. So I got a little poll. This is a little exercise. So if everybody could take out a piece of paper and a pen, give you a little bit to do that. So here we go on a scale of 1 to 10. And this is just a competency test. There's no hidden camera, so I'm not going to post anybody's score. So I want to see what your knowledge is in all these areas. So right now, where do you think you are in terms of your understanding of your wealth management plan? You know, 1 to 10. Just write it down. Remember, the wealth management plan's got a lot of pieces to it. A lot of pieces to it. How about with your wealth advisor? Do you feel like you really understand what they're doing? You feel that you're in sync with them? You feel that you've got a great team member, 1 to 10? How about all the issues in and around investment management, asset allocation, risk, return, and how you understand your accounts and how they are communicated to you on a regular basis versus how you're doing relative to your goals, how you're doing relative to your benchmark, and how you're doing relative to the amount of risk that you think you are taking, because March was a tough month. Was a tough month. 1 to 10. Write that down. Estate and a gift plan. How do you feel about that? How are your kids set up? How are your kids educated? Do you communicate with your kids? Do you not communicate with your kids? What does that look like? What's the money conversation about your wealth? What's happening to them? What do they need to know? 1 to 10. Banking and lending. Really the credit side of your balance sheet. You know, mortgages, rates. You know, maybe you have no debt. I don't know. 1 to 10. CPA tax planning. This also can include your tax attorney relative to taking a look at the efficiency in which your account operates. What are your after-tax returns? 1 to 10. Your family mission statement. What am I talking about? This is the document that kind of identifies, who you are and what you're up to and what your purpose is. And we'll talk about how to create one of these in the program, but where you're at relative to what's the core values of the family, what's important to you. 1 to 10. And then the family business. And so one of the things about the family business, maybe you don't own a business. Your net worth is your business. It's your family business. It's the most important thing to your family. And I use this example. There's some great videos on the internet about the Larry H. Miller family and the work that they've done inside of their family to create their sustainability of who their family is and what their mission is. And so there's some really great things that they've done as a unit, not only to transition the wealth from one generation to another, but to perpetuate that on a going forward basis. And this is a phenomenal picture of them, and really with the matriarch of the family in the middle, and just what they're all about in terms of their wealth, their money, the community, and really who they are and what they're doing for this generation and future generations. Investment policy statement. That's the agreement that you have with all your professionals that basically outlines and identifies who's doing what. And so what you know is that when pension fund endowments and anybody that's managing money for somebody else, they always use this tool. They always use this vehicle, this investment policy statement. 1 to 10. And then last but not least, asset protection. What are you doing? What are you doing to protect you against creditors, from the guy that slips and falls, the guy that you hit with your bicycle, the car runs over you, but you dented the hood. I mean, what do you do? So add it up, just kind of quickly, just put it together. We should have had little Jeopardy music, maybe. So, really, if you scored 80% or less, not kind of good or bad, right or wrong, but what you identify in this is you've got some vulnerability that you need to close that gap. And that's the piece that we just want to expose, and just don't show this to your wife. Anyway, all right, so we got that, and maybe you got a blind spot. Maybe there's just something that I brought up that you're like, God, I hadn't thought about that. And so this is really just it's a discovery process, because, quite frankly, there's this thing called mistakes. And I've seen a ton of them. And a mistake equals what I call a dumb tax. And so I'm gonna walk you through the 7 elements of the dumb tax, and we're gonna talk about them throughout. I'm gonna do this relatively quickly, but the first is behavior. And if you don't get a handle on who you are in the fear and greed cycle, you're gonna make emotional decisions at the wrong time. You wouldn't think people have murky goals, but I'll give you a bunch of examples of that they do. They're just not really clear on what it is that they're out to do. And they're just flat out uneducated about the things that are important in and around money. And when you're uneducated, the only thing that's next is you got to trust somebody. And then you have reliance without education, which creates an issue. So let me ask you this question. Which circle is bigger, the red or the blue? Wish we could have a poll, but we just don't. How about this? These guys are going to play a little basketball game. Why don't you count the amount of passes that they make? And I just want to test how aware you are when you're looking at something. So count the passes of the white team. All right, let's roll.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Go!
So it's really easy. When I frame something for you, I'm going to get you to look at something and you're going to ignore all the other things. And that's what happens in the industry. So let's get back to the circles. Which one's bigger? You know, I wish we had the poll. What's that? We got it? What is it?
Red. Blue, 50-50.
Is it down the middle?
Yeah.
They're the same size. They're not different. You know, I didn't give you a choice. I didn't say which one's bigger or they could be the same size. I just framed something in a certain way that I wanted you to go down a certain path. And so that's what can happen when you're uneducated. It's incredibly powerful. We have this expression that we've used in the class that you can torture data long enough and it'll confess to anything. I can take a snapshot of data in a particular section of time and create a result that's incredibly favorable, and you won't know because you're not aware of how I'm manipulating the data to get it to say what I want to say. Busy. I think this is one of the single most important, problematic, is attention span and busy. I don't have time to deal with my net worth. Now remember, side by side, your business income and your net worth are the two most important things to you. And if you pay attention to the net worth, it will exceed what you make from earned income. Compensation system is incredibly deceptive. The way that people get paid from commissions ranges dramatically. So how do you know you're getting impartial advice? And then incentive fees. I love this guy. Holy cow. And then complexity. Anybody, you could raise your hand. Ever went into an investment they didn't understand? You just bought the glossy. I think every single person that's ever come to the class has done that. There's just a level of complexity. So let's talk about the dumb tax. These are the 7 things. We really work hard at getting you through the storm.